I first want to give kudos to the late great British Empire. Their expertise in busting up formerly oppressed colonies into other kinds of entities that'll go at each other's throats is
without equal.
Precisely. The sun never sets on it, literally.
Yeah.
Whether we're talking about the breakup of India in 1947-48, whether we're talking about the breakup of, whether we're talking about the so-called Lancaster House agreement in 1979 around Rhodesia, which subsequently became Zimbabwe, whether we're talking about Hong Kong 1997, and probably God knows what else in between.
There we go.
So we owe this morning's festivities, so to speak, to the British Empire.
Yep.
And I'm not going to get into details about that because we're basically going to be talking about Tiananmen Square in Hong Kong today. And I presume people in this room have been keeping track of stuff, at least on the newscasts. Except that Gene called me this morning and told me that for the last 48 hours, there have been mobs of people surrounding the Hong Kong police building.
It's over.
It's over?
That's what the internet said 31 minutes ago. People left the police station. And the police made comments about, they were criticized for not fighting the protesters. They just stayed in the station and watched it all, and then they got tired and left. That's how the police.
They were criticized for not fighting.
For not beating them up, yeah.
What was the issue again? Say it.
Democracy!
The police. There were some mobs surrounding the police station, and it was basically a follow-up to all the stuff that's been going on the last few weeks there. And I guess somebody was trying to start some stuff and it didn't work, so they all had to pack up and go home.
Democracy, yeah, now I understand.
Yeah, right.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So anyway, this morning we have 4 distinguished speakers to talk about imperialism and counter-revolution in China, what really happened at Tiananmen Square on June 3rd to 4th, 1989, and what's happening in Hong Kong right now. And so our speakers are Richard Becker of the organization Answer, a longtime anti-imperialist activist and fighter, and wears a number of other hats too. But in this particular case, he's on the case on this fighting imperialism and its darings due. David Ewing of the U.S.-China People's Friendship Association, a longtime China, so-called China hand, but more like a longtime person who has fought continuously for the development of people's friendships between the two countries. And in the context of that, telling the truth about what's going on between the United States and China at any given moment. He's quite good at that. Eugene Ruyle, who is he's a what? A ne'er-do-well.
Well-known world traveler.
Yeah, well-known world traveler. He's considers himself an ICSS member. That is the Institute for the Study of Culture and whatever we call it here.
Critical study of society.
Critical study of societies. And he likes to think of himself as being the guy that just brings in the coffee and the donuts and stuff on Sundays and lets everything else float as it will. And Gerald Smith, longtime labor union person, longtime struggle against racial oppression of his people and everybody else. And I'm not gonna say much more about them. If they want to say more about themselves, we'll just let it go at that. So we're gonna ask folks to keep it from 10 to 15 minutes, and then we're going to break. Gene is going to pass the hat around. As we know, we have a Black Panther approach to fundraising here. That admission is free, but it'll cost you $25 to get out. So, fortunately, we don't take that last part seriously, but do give generously.
Let's get started.
You in a hurry?
Yeah. We have a time limit.
We are in a hurry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I have a job to work.
Oh my God. People have commitments on Sunday.
Yeah.
That's enough to make you want
We
to
have a commitment to 12:30, and it's probably 11 already.
Uh-huh. Well, that's not my fault we started late. It's only my fault that I'm
not
functioning
faulting
late.
anybody.
Yeah, right. So, who's going to speak first?
I am.
Go for it.
Okay. And again, we've allocated 15 minutes to each of the speakers. I will sell time, but I think it would be wise if someone else also had a timer and kept time, so that we knew nobody overspeaks, because we are limited in time.
And I've got the crook to pull people off stage.
So let me get started. And as you know, back in the day, all political meetings started with a geography lesson, like where is Vietnam, where is Laos, where is Cambodia. Then it started to be where is Afghanistan, and so forth. So in keeping with this tradition, we thought we might say, where is Hong Kong? And this is a map, and you see, where is it? It's not in Borneo or Korea, it's in China. So with that, let me go back to where I actually started. This fascinating slideshow. I'm not going to be able to get through all this. Okay, this is where we start. Now I'm going to start with this gentleman, Liu Shan, who is sometimes called the poet laureate of the Chinese Revolution. He was born in 1881, died in 1936, but that didn't stop him from producing the blueprint for the the Communist Revolution, as Mao and some other people said. He said something very significant. Lies written in ink cannot erase facts written in blood. And that raises an interesting question, because I think some people on the other side also use that. And it raises the question, well, what truth and what lies? Whose lies and whose blood are we talking about? This is an execution, presumably in 1905. It could have been the one that Liu Shan witnessed and changed his life. And what he said is he was studying to be a studying Western medicine, and he hadn't seen any fellow Chinese in a long time, but one day some of them showed up on a slide. One with his hands tied behind him was in the middle of the picture. The others were gathered around him. Physically, they were as strong and healthy as anyone could ask, but their expressions revealed all too clearly that spiritually they were calloused and numb. According to the caption, the Chinese whose hands were bound had been spying on the Japanese military for the Russians. He was about to be decapitated as a public example. The other Chinese gathered around him had come to enjoy the spectacle. And this had a tremendous impact on him because he said, what's happened to my people? And he decided he would give up medicine, keeping people's bodies healthy, and turn his attention to address the issue of the spiritual illness of the Chinese people. So, as we know, China, we have the century of humiliation. And I had a thing I gave earlier on how Europe underdeveloped China, because China was not always the poor man of Asia. I had a whole talk on that, but it can be summed up in one word: opium. That's how Europe underdeveloped China. And with the Opium Wars, 1839 to 42 and 1856 to 1860, the British in these two wars just took Hong Kong. They just forced the Chinese to sign the Treaty of Nanking, I think, and, and took Hong Kong. They didn't ask for it, they didn't pay rent, they didn't do anything, they just took it. Later they did sign a release for the new territories. But what impoverished China enriched the West. And here's a Boston Museum of Fine Arts. This is where some of the plunder from China went. It also went to support some famous politicians. Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He didn't talk too much about his grandfather, the Delano family, but they made their fortunes in the opium trade. So that's the kind of the background. And the truth that's written in blood is when the Chinese people stood up. And this started as early as the Taiping Rebellion, which was one of the most destructive wars in human history. Some people say 60 million people died. The Boxer Rebellion, 1899 to 1901, started by the so-called Society for the Harmonious Fist. And then Sun Yat-sen was a good revolutionary, namely he was a bourgeois revolutionist, as we would say now, and wanted to get Western ideas brought into China. But that didn't work all that well, because a little bit after that, we had the October Revolution, which transformed the world, as we all know. And the Chinese started looking it over and seeing, well, do we want to have a Western model or a Soviet model? And the more intelligent and advanced of them were all going for the Soviet model. So this is Tiananmen, May 4th, 1919, the start of the May 4th Revolution, or movement. And that was an anti-Western, anti-imperialist demonstration. And shortly thereafter, first of all, the Communist Party of China was formed in 1921, which, as you know, has 89 million members as of 2017, which makes it the largest communist party in the world and the second largest party in any sort after India's party.
BJP.
Pardon?
BJP.
Okay. Yes, we have our expert here.
What's he saying?
BJP.
Okay.
Party for BJP, that's
yeah.
the largest.
The Hindu party.
Right. So, and it's a kind of right-wing party, as I understand. Also, the founding of the All China Federation of Trade Unions in 1925, which is the largest trade union in the world, with 302 million members as of 2015. And from its very start, people kind of think, well, China doesn't do unions right because they don't have good unions like we have here in the United States, independent unions, so-called. Well, China was, the ACFTU was founded as an ally of the Communist Party. They've always been closely tied with the Communist Party, and they've been anti-imperialist from the very start. So I think one needs to bear that in mind when one's talking about the trade union movement in China, which I won't. But 1927, Chiang Kai-shek's Shanghai Massacre, you could see people bending over and shooting people there. That's the way they used to deal with communists. Mao Zedong took it and led the Chinese Communist Party on the Long March, 1934-35, and this still resonates with China. And so when Trump is saying, well, we're going to have a trade war with China and so forth, and the Chinese understand that that is an attack on them. They've withstood attacks, and that he's saying, we are going to need another long march, meaning we're going to have a very harsh trail in front of us. But I suspect they will win this one as they won the last one. And this is the route they followed all the way from southeastern China up into Tiananmen and elsewhere. Here's Mao Zedong, also at Tiananmen Square, October 1st. The Chinese people have stood up. And here's Tiananmen Square again. So this has a very great significance. And the Chinese talk about their sacred territory, the land of China, and certain places are more sacred than others, and Tiananmen Square has a great significance. It's just a map or chart of important buildings around there. But I think it's important, this is where the People's Republic of China was started, and again, it defines itself as a socialist state under the People's Democratic Dictatorship led by the working class and based on the alliance of workers and peasants, which is in essence the dictatorship of the proletariat. Now, a lot of people in the West don't accept this. They say, oh, I know what socialism is, and that's not it. But this is the Leninist definition of socialism. And again, I think in the course of liberating itself from Western imperialism, China has the right to define itself. We Western Marxists don't have the right to tell the Chinese what they are. And I think I could go on and on about that. Chairman Mao Zedong passed his vote on December 8, 1953. So when you hear people saying, oh, they don't have elections in China, well, they had them back in 1953. That was 20 years before Taiwan stopped having martial law under Chiang Kai-shek. And it was also, it's interesting, Gary alluded to this, the treaty, one country, two systems, that was negotiated between China and the British. It was a state-to-state negotiation, not an agreement with the people, the residents of Hong Kong, who were became citizens of China. And again, it was not that this was, the residents of Hong Kong were not included in this. So when the demonstrators talk about, oh, we're the first ones to have elections, we want to bring democracy to China and so forth, we have to know that there was nothing promised to the residents of Hong Kong. It was an agreement between states. Great Britain agreed to butt out, and China said, okay, it's ours now. We're going to have a 50-year program to integrate it into the rest of China. Some people misunderstand that and say, well, they agreed to leave us alone for 50 years, during which time we will decide whether what we're going to do and so forth. And everybody is entitled to their own opinions, but I think one should question that. Okay, Deng Xiaoping, he's the one that was in charge when the Tiananmen affair started off with the Battle of Beijing. And I'm just going to run through a lot of things here because we'll go over that again. But I did want to mention this person, Chai Ling. She was well known as one of the leaders of the Tiananmen demonstrations. She was one of the key agitators who said something to the effect that blood must be spilled. Tiananmen must be run with a river of blood. Only then will the Chinese people wake up and overthrow their government. And maybe also only then will the United States intervene. But this is what she didn't represent all the demonstrators, because she actually said and I don't want, how could I tell the people this is my plan? You know, they don't know any of this. But she didn't represent everybody. Hu Dezhong was a very popular singer from Taiwan. He came to China and was also popular in China. And he actually joined the demonstrators, and because it was for democracy, he thought it was a good idea, and he actually went on the hunger strike with others. But at a certain point, he realized this has got to stop. This is madness. And so what he did was he actually stopped the hunger strike, started talking to people, negotiated with the army, and basically pushed everybody out. Those that didn't want to go, he dragged out. And the troops then let all the demonstrators leave Tiananmen Square on their own. There's a lot of tension, but as they said, there was no bloodshed in Tiananmen Square itself. So that's important. And actually that is as per Deng Xiaoping's orders. He said, I don't care if you have to pick up 1,000 demonstrators and carry them out on your backs. No bloodshed. No blood should be shed in Tiananmen Square. That was in the Tiananmen papers.
What year again?
That was in 1989. Okay, Hong Kong protests, finally getting down to it. Here's Hong Kong. This is the Chinese quarter. You can see how crowded it is, so that's one picture. Here are the three parts of Hong Kong. You see Hong Kong Island, Kowloon, which is on the main line, and the new territories, which were the least areas. And they're all part of what they call the Bay Area of China, which includes Hong Kong, Macau, Guangzhou, which is Canton, and the center of the opium trade, and Shenzhen, which is the new, is equivalent to Silicon Valley, except it's much more intense. And it went from about 30,000 people 20 years ago or 30 years ago to 14 million now. So all told, this has about 50 or 60 million people in this area. We've seen that. This is a picture of Hong Kong itself, and the main business district and working class districts are down on the flatlands, and up in the Mount Victoria, I believe, is where the rich people live, namely where the Westerners live. And this is Macau.
Large penis.
Pardon? I'll cover that later. This is Macau, which was leased to the Portuguese, like in 1555 or something like that. And the Portuguese actually paid rent to the Chinese, which is something Great Britain never did. But it's now about 700,000. It's well known as a place to go to gamble, have fun. It's bigger than Las Vegas. Here's Shenzhen, China's Silicon Valley, huge place. This is Guangzhou, or Canton, another highly developed city. And this is the Macau-Hong Kong Bridge. It's the longest seagoing bridge in the world. It spans the mouth of the Pearl River, and it's 34 miles in length. It's one of China's huge projects.
Excuse me, may I ask when that was built?
I'd rather go on and finish
I
here.
just want to know when it was built.
They just finished it this last year.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, here's ultra radicals attack a police corps. This is within the last week or so. And you can see these are peaceful demonstrators. Here's Carrie Lam. She was born in 1957 in Hong Kong. She is the chief executive of Hong Kong. She was elected by in 2017, and she represents the majority of the people in Hong Kong do support her. There's something like 950,000 of them signed a petition saying they supported her and they supported the extradition bill because it plugged a hole in Hong Kong. So letting all these people. The basic reason behind this is there's this couple that went to from Hong Kong. Okay, I'll finish it. From Hong Kong
Sorry
to
about that.
Taiwan for a get together, romantic getaway, and apparently she told him that she was pregnant by another guy, so he killed her, and then dumped his body somewhere, fled to Hong Kong, and confessed. So that's kind of inspired that. This is the umbrella movement, Hong Kong protest. Here's this guy. I just want to say one last thing about this guy, because I showed this to one of our comrades who is from Hong Kong. And I showed him this picture. You know this guy, Joshua Wong? He's CIA. Apparently this is well known in Hong Kong, but it's not well known. And when Amy Goodman brings her on her program, she doesn't mention that little fact. But in fact, there's a huge community of nonprofits in Hong Kong who get their funds from there. But I'll stop there and turn it over to these other gentlemen.
Thank you. He's a Christian fundamentalist, the right-wing Christian fundamentalist. This guy.
Okay.
I don't think you guys are being fair to them.
Okay, so they're in a counter-revolution. I want to say just a few things quickly about the Shenzhen, which was a very sleepy, tiny railroad junction. And in the 1960s and 1970s, because there were no diplomatic relations between China and the U.S., China had to basically smuggle American communists into China. So when I went to China in the 70s, we had someone smuggle our visas out of Canada. We went to Hong Kong, and we went up to the border, Shenzhen, and I crossed China into Shenzhen, I guess in '75 the first time. And Shenzhen was just a railroad station, and like palm trees all around. It was a railroad stop. Now maybe there was a little village there, but it was really, really tiny. And I don't remember seeing villagers walking around Shenzhen. It was mainly a railroad terminal. Today, Shenzhen is an incredible metropolis, and it is the center of China's Silicon Valley. Something more about Macau. I have not been to Macau in 30 or 40 years, but it was just stunning to see the slides of the gambling casinos. Last time I was in Macau, it was under Portuguese rule, and it was a very sleepy kind of combination of Portuguese culture and Cantonese culture. And they had some casinos, but they had these like Soviet-style white 3 or 4, unreinforced concrete buildings about 4 stories high, giant, like half a block. And those were the casinos. It was not decorative. And there were people playing all kinds of Cantonese gambling card games in the casino. So that's my impression. And I walked around to try to go to a Portuguese restaurant, and so I was only there one time and it was very brief. But it's amazing the kind of changes I have seen in China in my lifetime. It's like more than 100 years has passed. By America, it's like the kind of change you had in America in the last 150 years, you had in China in 20 or 30 years. Just an astonishing development. So we're talking today about the events of 1989, Tiananmen Square, and then also we'll talk about Hong Kong too, I hope. So we're talking events that happened in 1989. So of course I'm going to talk about, my talk begins with 1849. 1849 was the year that Karl Marx moved to London. And soon after his arrival, the revolutionary movement that eventually swept and engulfed all of Asia was just beginning. So Raj told me that the Sepoy Rebellion, the vast rebellion of Indian people for freedom in 1857 took place while Marx was in London. He was the only real journalist who covered it in the English language. And he and Engels covered it, and they viciously attacked British imperialism for the crimes against the people of the East, and the people especially of India. Shortly after that was the Sepoy Mutiny in around 1860. The Taiping Rebellion occurred in China, and that was an immense struggle. I think Gene is right, millions and millions of people were lost. And the final battles of the Taiping Rebellion were fought in Shanghai against British troops. The rebellion lasted about 6 or 7 years. It was at the same time as the American Civil War. So Americans were engulfed in the war and they weren't following what was happening. It's sort of excluded from American text. Maybe that's part of the reason. But anyway, the day of the battle between the Taipings and the British soldiers in Shanghai, it snowed. It does not ever snow in Shanghai. It was incredibly bad luck for the Taipings. They didn't have winter clothing, they weren't prepared for that, and the British had entrenched positions and were able to machine gun them in the attack. This was important, the Taipings had to win this battle or they were going to lose the war. So they ended up losing that battle, and then the British and the Chinese regime massacred many Chinese people. Millions died in that battle. So I think the upsurge all through Asia was taking place, and not only in the big countries, but also in Southeast Asia to some extent. People might know the French author André Malraux. Do people know who André Malraux was? Okay. So Malraux's first important book, I think, is Man's Fate, the book about the Chinese Revolution, which I read as a teenager. And there were not many, at the time of the great 1925 seaman strike, that is the subject of this book, there was very little reporting in the US about what was happening in Hong Kong and in Canton, Guangzhou. These were, again, as a seaman strike in those two cities, Guangzhou and Hong Kong, both under British control, although Hong Kong, of course, was a direct colony of Britain then, and ever since the Opium War. So Malraux, after World War I, Malraux, who later, by the way, became the commander of the International Brigades Air Force in Spain. During the Spanish Civil War, he commanded the International Brigades Air Force in Spain. But after World War I, he went to French Indochina, which was all controlled by France, and he bought a surplus World War I French airplane. So Malraux was the first person to fly over the jungles of Southeast Asia. And he was interested in archaeology and art. He became the most important art historian in French culture. So he discovered he was the first person to discover ancient Khmer and primitive sites, archaeological sites in Southeast Asia. That was Malraux. He was in, and because he was close to Hong Kong, he was in Hong Kong during the time of the 1925 seaman strike, which developed into a general strike. All the important figures of the Chinese Revolution and the revolutionaries from Hong Kong and Guangzhou, Guangdong province, all the important figures were involved in that early strike in 1925. And the Malraux book, because it's like a chronology, it almost reads like journalism. So many people thought it was like a journalistic account of really what happened. But it's an amazing, colorful story about the role of the Comintern people helping the Chinese workers, helping them fight against the British, and all the things that happen in a revolutionary situation, the eventual defeat of the strike. Here's my favorite scene, if I remember from 50 years ago, was people were waiting, they had lost, they were waiting to be executed by the British. And the British had a great big firebox on a giant steam engine. And they were throwing people into the firebox. That's how they were executing them. So people were standing in line, the communists were standing in line waiting to be executed, and one guy was the Comintern guy, he had a suicide pill. So they're trying to divide the suicide pill so they wouldn't have to die and be thrown into the firebox. So it was a big, important image. After the Hong Kong strike, the revolutionary movement grew. All of the important leaders, the communist leadership was really formed in that strike, and then it developed until finally the victory. I won't go through all the history, but until the victory of 1949. After 1949, parts of China were still unfree, still not liberated. Taiwan, Macau, and especially Hong Kong were still under British rule. China was determined, and the Chinese people have been determined to liberate these territories. The revolution in China is incomplete because they have not yet been liberated, but there is determination to do so. I'm talking about Tiananmen a moment. I don't want to talk about the details of Tiananmen because people here know the details and can talk about that. I just want to say what an incredibly close call